Okay, perfect. That was seamless. So welcome again to today's webinar on the basics of forecasting cyclones for anticipatory action. As a reminder, that the concepts covered in this particular webinar are going to be revisited throughout the series and were introduced in the introduction by Erin, and also some very similar things in the flood webinar last week. And you're going to get a chance to learn and interact with not just the forecast and forecast triggers, but also the sort of implementations and so on. And that will be carried on through into the heat wave and cold wave session, which is session 4 next week. We know that there have been a small number of questions in the registration on quite advanced topics. This series is very much on the basics. It's a sort of beginner's guide to the forecasting and AA. We will have a Q&A at the end of this session if you want to ask anything in more detail, or we're happy to talk with you after the call as well. So just in terms of an agenda for today, it follows very similar format to the agenda last week on flooding. We're going to start off with a bit of a dialogue with the scientists, with myself, to talk a little bit about cyclone forecasts, and then we'll go into a Q&A with practitioners. And afterwards, of course, we'll be providing resources after this session, and we will hit the stop recording button at 2:30 CET, so you can ask questions that you're not happy to ask when it's being recorded. So I hope that some of you had a chance to watch Erin's videos on cyclones. These covered an introduction to the different classifications of tropical cyclones, and also talked a little bit more about the forecast uncertainty. And we're going to go into more detail on that today. I think essentially I'm going to be presenting you with a bunch of problems to do with the cyclone forecasts, and then we'll hear from practitioners who've been working around that and finding solutions to them. So just to follow on from last week, I think it's important to think about how we're building on that session, which was on the anticipatory action from floods. And I hope many of you were able to join last week. So we discussed the different types of floods, and we learned about how many of those different types of flooding can actually be caused by tropical cyclones. So I'm not going to be revisiting those kind of flood forecasts again, but we will be thinking more about tropical cyclones in more detail, and we'll be thinking about the tropical cyclone forecasts themselves. And I will be explaining to you why they are like a bowl of spaghetti, which some of you might be familiar with already. But let's start a little bit with thinking about the hazards and impacts from a tropical cyclone. So we learned about
Liz,
how, yes.
Liz, have you started your slides, restarted your slides? Because we don't see them right now.
Okay. Yep, let me go.
Because nobody can miss the bowl of spaghetti. That's my favorite
No,
slide.
well, that's true. Very good. So the bowl of spaghetti is on the first slide there. So those of you who joined early will have seen it. But yeah, let's go back to this particular photo, which many of you identified was from Cyclone Idai. A nice bit of drone footage of the impacts. And I'd like you to add into the chat, what hazards can you see within this image, or what impacts can you see as well? And I think we're especially interested in using our imaginations a bit more. So try and think of impacts that you can see in this image that perhaps might not be the usual ones that you might see. It gives you then an idea of some of the things that you might need to prepare for. Yeah, risk of electrocution, that's a great one. Waterborne disease, destruction of houses, you can definitely see. Loss of livelihoods. I'm getting a little bit itchy about the person walking through the mud and the floodwater with bare feet. Yeah, so someone else saying the risks from children playing in the floodwaters. So I think we can see that there's a whole lot going on in this image that maybe a simple forecast trigger is not going to be able to capture. So when we're thinking about tropical cyclones, we need to have that in the back of our mind all the time, of what exactly are those impacts going to be and how can we prepare for them. So we had this slide last week, but I want you to think again about our sort of buzzword bingo card. We'll be mentioning a lot of these terms again this week, things like return period, uncertainty, trigger, lead time. They're going to reappear again in every single one of these webinars. So just listen out for when we might be using those terms. And hopefully, if you're not familiar with those, please ask in the chat. And we've got members of the Climate Centre science team who would be happy to give you the definitions. So just starting off with tropical cyclones, I imagine that this is kind of not unfamiliar to you, but we can think about where in the world tropical cyclones occur. So they occur over tropical waters, in tropical regions fueled by warm ocean waters. They tend to move westwards because of the easterly winds in the tropics, and then they move slightly towards the poles as well. And then they kind of start what we call recurving as they get more towards the poles. So they sort of recurve and start going westwards. And please do ask questions in the chat at any time. So you've kind of seen the cyclone basins where tropical cyclones can occur, but here you've got a nice mess. This is kind of getting towards our bowl of spaghetti of all of the different tracks that tropical cyclones have taken in the past. So you can start to see that these tracks are showing that standard pattern of they're moving towards the west, and then as they move a little bit more towards the poles, then they can start recurving round again. And so how are tropical cyclones forecasted? There are a number of different ways that they're forecasted at different lead times, and the information that's provided by those forecasts kind of represent the uncertainty in the forecast at those lead times. So there are seasonal forecasts of tropical cyclone activity. Those forecasts for the North Atlantic came out quite recently, and they tend to be forecasting how many storms are likely in a season compared to what the normal range of storms would be. But there is a lot of uncertainty around this forecast, and we saw that the seasonal forecast this year for the Southwest Indian Ocean didn't get anywhere near the right number of storms correct. We also get medium range predictions of tropical cyclone genesis, and those tell us where might see a cyclone in the next 1 to 2 weeks. And we get those short-term forecasts of cyclone track and intensity, which tell us where will a storm go and how intense will it be. And also that takes us more into the realms of the sort of normal weather forecasting that we might look at. So things like heavy rainfall forecasts or intense wind speeds, that kind of thing. So I thought it was important to mention who forecasts cyclones, because it is quite a global enterprise that's coordinated through the World Meteorological Organization. Generally, cyclone forecasts require global prediction systems, which is why you hear about forecasts in, I don't know, the Southwest Indian Ocean coming from ECMWF, for example, the European Centre, because they run one of the global prediction models. So you get forecast agencies like the Japanese, the US, ECMWF, the Met Office, who run those global models, and they produce predictions of tropical cyclones. But the actual forecasts tend to come from these regional specialized meteorological centers, and they integrate all of those different forecast models to produce a sort of best estimate of where they think the storm will go and how intense it will be. And of course, you then get national meteorological services who are responsible for issuing those national early warning systems. And so when a storm threatens their particular area of responsibility, they kind of take on those forecasts from those regional centers. Yeah.
Sorry, Liz, we can no longer see your screen.
Oh, that's odd.
Would you try resharing maybe?
Yeah. You can
It's
see
there.
that now.
Thank you.
I'm not sure why it keeps on dropping off. Just let me know when it disappears and I will reshare again. Great. So we have those regional centers, and they will be providing those forecasts to the national meteorological services who issue the warnings in the country. Now, I know that this can get very confusing because you're basically getting a lot of information from lots of different sources. And just to add to that confusion, we also know that different regional centers communicate cyclone intensities differently. And each basin has its own classification system. So in the US, they report wind speeds as a 1 minute maximum sustained winds, and they have a category 5 hurricane. This is the top category of 252 kilometers an hour. In India, it's 3 minute sustained winds. The super cyclonic storm is the top category, and that's 221 kilometers an hour. The Southwest Indian Ocean, 10-minute sustained winds. Very intense tropical cyclone is 212 kilometers an hour. So they're all slightly different, and that can be a bit confusing when you can't really just pick a threshold from one cyclone basin and apply it to another cyclone basin, because they mean different things. And I'm just going to say, remember this pink line, which is the tropical storm threshold. So if we have that very confusing picture of different classifications and different ways of reporting winds in different basins, how on earth are we going to produce a trigger or a forecast threshold? Well, first of all, you need to be thinking about what the past impacts of the cyclone were. So maybe they were from wind speeds or heavy rainfall or river flooding or storm surge, and your trigger would probably be based on which one of those is more important. You need to think about the exposure and vulnerability. Where are people living? What kind of building type are they living in? You might be limited by resource availability. Do you really have the funds to be able to act several times in a year in a country like the Philippines, which sees several cyclones in a year? Maybe you wouldn't have the capacity to be able to act on all of them. And you also want to think through the choice of anticipatory action that you want to take as well. How long does it take for that action to implement? Are they regional actions, so something like pre-positioning in a specific region, or is it a local action like supporting evacuation to a particular shelter? And you need to think about whether you're happy taking these actions, given the likelihood of false alarms and missed events. And I'll be covering the uncertainty a bit more in a bit. So just to give you some examples of cyclone triggers, it might be something like you use an ECMWF tropical cyclone genesis forecast, which gives you a sort of 7-day indication of whether a tropical storm is possible within a region. And then at shorter lead times, you might be relying on your National Hydromet Service, and then you'd be looking perhaps at a forecast of a particular threshold of storm, so like a very severe cyclonic storm strength or greater within maybe the next 3 days. And let's explain a little bit more why we might be looking at different forecasts and different lead times, and the sort of uncertainty involved in them. So why is it that you can't ignore uncertainty in tropical cyclone forecasts? So even if you were looking at a forecast which just gives you, say, the black line on this image, there's a lot of uncertainty that's hidden behind that. This plot is actually called a spaghetti plot because you can see it kind of looks like a mess of spaghetti on the map. And in this situation, you have an ensemble forecast, which gives multiple different realizations of what the weather could do. And you can see the track that's been estimated from each of those forecasts. So each of those individual tracks there are equally likely as each other. They're all plausible solutions. Now, where they cluster together, then we can have more confidence that the storm will go in that location. But we can't really rule out that some of those slightly more wacky ensemble members, maybe one that's going to be affecting Honduras, for example, compared to one that might stay out in the Atlantic Ocean. Each of those is equally likely, and we shouldn't really rule them out. Generally, we see that a cone of uncertainty is used to summarize these spaghetti plots when it comes to a forecast. So this is actually the same storm a little bit further on, and you can see the forecast from the National Hurricane Center is kind of summarizing that big mess of spaghetti behind it. And 4.5 days out, that large area of that cone is over 600 kilometers in diameter. So you've got a lot of uncertainty even at that 4.5-day lead time. And on top of that, that cone is only showing the uncertainty in the central track of the storm. So it's not where dangerous wind speeds will be experienced, which could be outside that cone area. And just to add a little bit of scientific detail to that, this is an assessment of forecast uncertainty in the Southwest Indian Ocean. You can look at those plots if you like, but essentially this is an assessment of the errors in the track location and the wind speed at different lead times. So you can see that even at the 1-day lead time, the average error in track is around 100 kilometers, and that increases to around 600 kilometers at a 7-day lead time. And the wind speed errors, you see a general underprediction of 20 kilometers an hour at a 1-day lead time, 40 kilometers an hour at a 7-day lead time. These errors are going to be different in different cyclone basins. It's the average error, so different models are going to be better for different storms, and models are improving all of the time as well. But this gives us a rough guide to what we can expect from a forecast in terms of the uncertainty. And yes, that is even the case in the AI forecasts as well. So on the left, you can see different AI forecasts for a storm, tropical cyclone Dikelede. And on the right, you can see the Météo France forecast cone, actually from a day later, but about a similar lead time. And in the middle, you can see what actually happened. So you can see that the different AI forecasts are still producing a range of different tracks. And you can also see with this one that one of the AI models did actually predict the storm making landfall in Mozambique way before the Météo France forecasts were doing so. But that's only just one of those models, and we need to do a more comprehensive verification for all of the storms and not just this one example that I've shown here. And just to say as well that while they might be doing a bit better at track, none of the AI models are getting the intensity of the cyclone anywhere near right, and at least not just yet. And also I wanted to mention rapid intensification. So this is when a tropical cyclone strengthens rapidly over a short period of time. So at least 56 kilometers an hour in a 24-hour period. All forecast models currently struggle to predict rapid intensification. And all super typhoons that have affected the Philippines recently have undergone rapid intensification. So you can already start to get a handle on the challenge there. Hurricane Otis intensified by 165 kilometers an hour in just 21 hours, shortly before landfall in Mexico. And no forecast model predicted this at all. So in terms of early warning and anticipatory action, there's an extreme challenge there. And just to add to that sorry story, scientists have found that rapid intensification is happening more often because of climate change. So we do need to be able to prepare for that. So I just wanted to take you through a little bit of a sort of forecast story and the uncertainty that you might be faced with. This is a Genesis forecast, tropical cyclone Genesis forecast for the Southwest Indian Ocean. This is at a 9-day lead time. So this was made on the 6th of December for Sunday, the 15th of December. And it shows that there's a 60 to 70% chance of a tropical cyclone of tropical storm strength or greater within 300 kilometers of that location. So perhaps you can put in the chat what you might do on the basis of this forecast, and maybe what other information do you need to know as well. So please have a think about that. And in the meantime, while you're thinking about it, perhaps I can ask Bella to come on the mic from the Red Cross in Madagascar. Bella, could you tell us what you might be doing at CRM at this kind of lead time? What actions might you be taking? We can't hear you, Bella, so you might have to turn on your mic. So at this point in the forecast, you can see that the cyclone is set to affect the northern part of Madagascar. So it's still 9 days out, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So I've said before, you get a lot of uncertainty at those longer lead times. Maybe it's even, you might expect errors of like 600 kilometers in terms of where the cyclone can go. But you are getting information that the country is going to be at risk in 9 days' time. I'm wondering if Bella has dropped off. Are you there, Bella?
Yes, I'm here. Can you
Hi,
hear me?
we can,
Yes.
yeah. So what might
Yes.
CRM be doing at this kind of lead time?
Okay, so in this scenario, at 9 days lead time, we will do nothing, but a similar forecast at 7 days rather than 9 days. We would start contracting with a transport company to transport the prepositioning items from the warehouses in the north, the warehouses of Malagasy Red Cross in the north, to the evacuation sites. And this will allow us to have a choice for the intervention area, because as we get closer to landfall, we might only be implementing anticipatory action in one location. So the other information we might need to know is the more precision about the intervention area. Yes.
Great. So you're pre-positioning in a number of locations at this point in time, right? Because you don't know exactly where the storm's going to go.
Yes. So, for example, in the northern part of Madagascar,
Oh, we've lost.
Sava
Yeah.
region, and one in the Tian. Can you hear me?
We can. You're cutting out a bit, but we got
Please, you can hear.
the most of that. Thanks, Bella.
Okay.
So we can
Okay.
see.
Okay.
Thanks. So we can see at this kind of lead
Thank
time
you.
that the Malagasy Red Cross are having to pre-position, but in a number of locations because of that uncertainty in the forecast. And I can see lots of suggested actions in the chat as well, which is great. Things like carrying out training activities and doing low regret activities. So in the next forecast, this is from December the 11th, the forecast, you can see the cone of uncertainty now, and this forecast takes the storm further to the north than the original predicted area. So you've got some actions that you've been proposing there. Are you still comfortable with the original actions that you took, given what the previous forecast was and the actions that you were taking at a 3-day lead time? So this is potentially 2 days out from a landfall in Madagascar, although the central track of the storm is maybe just skirting just the top of the island. So are you still happy with the actions that you took in your head before, when it was perhaps showing that this kind of northern tip of the island could be affected? Or are you kind of annoyed because now it's maybe going further to the north? And what might you be doing now, which is 2 days before potential landfall in Madagascar?
So, at 2 days lead time, um, we will evacuate the people to the evacuation centers, and in the evacuation site, we will distribute the kits and all of the items we are planning to, and also the volunteers of the Malagasy Red Cross will disseminate the alerts.
Great, thanks, Bella. And so perhaps you can see the activities of the Red Cross are sort of able to adapt to that changing forecast. But if you were maybe an organization that's working in a single area, like here, and you took actions in that community, you might be a bit frustrated now that the storm is now pointing further north. But I think you've kind of just got to accept that if you need to take actions at the 7-day lead time, then that might end up being a false alarm when it gets to sort of 2 days out. So here is a forecast from December the 12th from Meteo France. And it takes the storm even further north. So again, are you still comfortable with your original actions, and what might you be doing now?
Okay, so in this case, as the storm will not not make landfall in the Sava region. I think the Red Cross will stick with only two anticipatory action. The first one will be just the management of the evacuation centers, and the second one will be the dissemination of alert messages via different channels, multi-channels like TV or radio. And for the other activities like distribution of kits, we will not do those activities. Only the two.
Great. So you can see that I'm being a really annoying forecaster with the Malagasy Red Cross, because my original warning that something might have affected the north of the country is now perhaps being toned down a little bit. But luckily, Bella is nice and calm about this and has already thought through this situation, or it seems like it. And I think it's worth mentioning. So it was kind of a trick question before to see whether you'd been listening in the previous parts of what I was saying. So this is a forecast from Meteo Madagascar on December the 13th. And you can see that the storm is still tracking to the north of Madagascar. But Meteo Madagascar are still predicting wind impacts in the far north of the country. So it's just a reminder that the central track of the storm is not the only place where impacts will be experienced. So don't just focus on that central track of the storm. And even if it's going outside your area of interest, it might be that there are still impacts where you are working. And I just wanted to share as well that we heard last week from Chance from Malawi Red Cross about what they do from cyclone forecasts when they think that flooding will occur. This forecast is from DCCMS in Malawi on December the 13th. And I wonder whether you had considered the risk of flooding in Malawi, which is a landlocked country. So you might not be thinking immediately about Malawi being affected by a cyclone. So had you considered way back in those original forecasts that Malawi might have been affected by flooding? And here is DCCMS, the meteorological service, providing forecasts and a red warning of flooding some way before landfall, even in Mozambique. And I know Lena is going to talk a little bit more about this particular cyclone, which was Cyclone Chido, which you heard about making impacts in Mayotte and Mozambique in December last year. So just to summarize a little bit, what are we seeing from the forecasts? We have different forecasts at different lead times, so you need to be comfortable with reading all of these different types of forecasts. Often those red warnings are only issued within 1 to 2 days because it's based on when the impacts might be experienced, not just if they'll be experienced. And the uncertainty reduces as we get closer to landfall, so you need to be prepared for any changes to the forecast. Remember that the storm could track anywhere within that cone of uncertainty, and the impacts could be felt outside of that cone as well. So given that uncertainty, it's worth thinking through your contingency plans for if the storm takes a different path or strengthens rapidly at the last minute. And Dorothy can talk a little bit more about how we might do that. So over to you, Dorothy.
Can you guys hear me? Sorry. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks so much, Liz. Yeah, just quickly, we wanted to show you a little bit about work that we're doing currently at the Climb Center and at Reading, and that we did a couple weeks ago with Bella and the CRM team in Madagascar. The whole point here is to think about how we actually deal with uncertainty when we're developing implementation plans and when we're actually developing anticipatory action systems. A lot of what Liz just showed us, I think, is that we can't just rely on storms that have happened in the past to plan for anticipatory action currently and in the future. And so we're developing these approaches that use kind of new scenarios of storms to ask us questions about like how it would react to this, a little bit like what Liz talked us through in her different slides. So this is work that's ongoing. So if you're keen to, I guess, chat more or connect with us, please do let us know. Yeah, I think we can go from there. The whole point really is to kind of have us talk through every step, every lead time, every uncertainty. What is it that we would do, and how those steps work together. Back over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Dorothy. So we've heard a little bit about how you might be able to prepare for different scenarios, but we also know that through implementation in practice, we can learn from the experiences of other practitioners. So we've talked a little bit maybe about false alarms today in the cyclone forecasts, and you'll know as well that a cyclone forecast doesn't have perfect skill. So what might you do if the cyclone is forecasted later than hoped? And what happens if at a shorter lead time, the forecast points to a different location being affected? So now we are going to hear a little bit more from the practitioners on this. So I'd like Abdu to come on the mic first. Abdu has been working in the Philippines for the START network. So Abdu, could you tell us a little bit more about the impact-based forecasting that you do for tropical cyclones in the Philippines? And I know that you've had to deal with a lot of challenges around forecast uncertainty, particularly because of rapid intensification. So perhaps you could talk about that a bit more too.
Thank you very much, Liz. Yeah, I think in Philippines we have this cyclone system for 4 years now. I think you explained very well the uncertainties we may be facing, like in terms of forecasting, and but our system in Philippines is quite forecast based. So the model is designed actually to predict the percentage of totally damaged houses based on a given typhoon tracks. So basically we input parameters like from both meteorological rainfall, wind speed, and also structural parameter like household materials, number of house, in addition to the typhoon track itself. So for Philippines, we use ECMWF ensemble typhoon track forecasts up to 72 hours before landfall to provide probabilistic estimates of the percentages of houses damaged by municipalities. And then I think we translate that into total population affected, actually. So I think the more important things here regarding the rapid intensifications, we're trying to actually mitigate this with this matrix system. I think you can see the matrix actually is based on is combining severities and forecast probabilities into a trigger mechanism. So we are able actually to capture the different scenarios which may happen for our coverage area. Just to remind, for us as Start Networks, our fund is actually a pooled fund, so we are transferring some risk to the insurance market. So we need to make sure that the accuracy of our model is actually very high. So we are only activating at 3 days lead times. Like we are not actually allowing ourselves, like after up to 3 days lead times, I think we can't activate because of this contracting and actually the quality of forecast requirement with reinsurance market. So this matrix actually allow us to capture all the scenarios which may happen. You can see like it shows the probabilities and the different severities. So we are not triggering based on the variable itself, but we are triggering based on the impacts we are expecting on the different area we are covering. So we may have a cyclone with lower severities, expected lower severities, but higher impact. So we'll be able to trigger to take actions. But if it's come with lower probabilities to happen and also lower impact, then I think it may not warranting any actions for us to in terms of like AA implementations. So we are covering Cagayan, Eastern Samar, and Surigao del Norte. One of the main challenges we've been facing, I think Liz just mentioned, is when you have multiple cyclone, like the last cyclone happened, Christine, in Philippines, we just realized we are planning to anticipate that cyclone, but then when multiple cyclones happen at the same area, that's a great question for those who are implementing on ground, like how would we actually implement anticipatory action in that context? And then I'll be very happy to hear from practitioners like how we are really able to make sure that we are doing anticipatory action in that context. There's some things we still thinking about, but I think having flexibilities in the plan is some things which may be really, really helpful. In the next slide, I will show you specifically for Cyclone Christine what happened. our model simulated the different damage, like we see the cyclone track. This on your right, you could actually see the simulated damage we are expecting, and I think we always build the contingency plan based on those informations, and you could see also what really happened in terms of the reported damages. So, which is in some sense like different from what we are expecting. So actually the uncertainties are not only linked to the cone of predictions, like as Liz just shows, you have different tracks from different predictive model, but you also have some uncertainties relating to the expected damage on the ground when you are doing forecast-based impact-based forecast. But then I think it's up to how you are working on your contingency planning and how flexible your contingency planning are. In Start Networks in Philippines, we have different scenario and we have different plan for each scenario. So when it's happened, when the cyclone, the rapid intensification happened, we were always able to activate the different plan we have got so far. So it's easy for us to tackle the different scenario we have been facing. But of course, as Liz said, like it's very hard to anticipate the rapid intensifications, and it's actually creates a lot of operational challenges, which we keep thinking about how to solve them and make sure that in terms of anticipatory actions, what we are planning, we are able to implement them. And it's very important also to think about which kind of actions you are planning and to be realistic as well, like on 3-day lead time, which kind of actions you could easily implement and make sure that you're having more impacts. And I think that's mainly what we have been doing in Philippines. And of course, after each activations, we have after activation evaluations like performance assessment, and we always try to improve. We learn from the activations what fails, what works well, and we always we come back always trying to improve the system for the next season. I think I will maybe stop here, and then I'm happy to take question and maybe also have separate discussion if you want to understand more on the system.
Thanks, Abdu. That's great. I think it's really interesting to see for a country like Philippines where there is a lot of impact data available. You can really see the challenges in terms of predicting the locations that will be impacted as well. And I know that there's lots of people exploring different ways of not just taking the track forecasts, but also the rainfall forecasts and the flood forecasts and trying to bring that together to predict those impacts. But in countries where you don't have the same level of damage information as you do in the Philippines, you're kind of working in the dark with it. You don't really know what's going on, and often the impact data sets don't cover that amount of information. So I think even though you're showing the model was maybe not good at predicting the damage, it's probably the same everywhere. We just don't have that level of detail on it. And I think it's fascinating as well that you're kind of stuck with that 3-day lead time because you're linking with the financing and so on. So there are particular requirements that are coming in for that. But I wonder whether you've then had to limit the sort of choice of actions that Start Network partners have been able to do because of that 3-day lead time limitation.
Yeah, thank you. You're actually right, because like in Madagascar, actually, we also have a cyclone framework, but we only triggering on wind speed in Madagascar, which is quite challenging. I saw Bella was replying to some of your questions, which I think last couple of years, like we had a situation where the cyclone just suddenly changed the track, and we only have actually 1 day's lead time to act. And imagine if you don't have any members in the different area, like it's quite challenging for us as well. And you know, the limitation with only triggering on wind speeds is quite like, first of all, the classification itself. And in Madagascar, I don't know for Red Cross, but we always stick on official sources, actually. Instead of really using different sources, we always prefer aligning with Met Madagascar. And I know Met Madagascar only raise the alarm when they have 3-day lead time. I've been in touch with them trying to figure out if we could actually increase it to 5, but I think it's it's very difficult and it's quite impossible. But yeah, so regarding the question of which kind of actions we are implementing, I think in Philippines, yeah, we have been trying. We have very long years of experience, and we have been learning and improving the system. What we do now, we are really pushing to make sure that the actions and activities we are planning are really in line with what we could actually do within those 3 days lead time. And yeah, so the contingency planning workshop, we took it very seriously, and we're trying really to learn and to see which kind of activities are really suitable and could be easily implemented in those 3 days lead time, and in the designing and how we are setting those activities, pre-positioning fund. We also have like what we call national reserve, which is kind of preparedness fund. So members are able to start preparing some activities. So it's easier actually the implementation when we trigger the anticipatory action activities itself. So yeah, it's quite challenging, but I think we have been learning so far and improving year on year. And yeah, so
Yeah,
it's
interesting. I think well, I know actually that ECMWF and Meteo Madagascar are working together to look at that longer lead time forecast and the sort of pre-activation, which I know that some people are asking about in the chat at the moment. So I think that's kind of a watch this space, but the Met services are getting on board with this. And I think this is really important for why we have these kind of webinars. So asking these questions to the Met services in the country you're working and really sharing with them that, yes, we need this pre-activation trigger to be able to do our pre-positioning. So please communicate that information to us at the longer lead times. And by having those conversations, it really helps the forecasters to understand what they need to be communicating to humanitarian partners, even if they're not communicating to the public yet. So thank you very much. And I noticed as well that you were talking about the differences between Philippines and Madagascar. And this leads nicely onto my question to Pauline, who works for the OCHA Center for Predictive Analytics. So Pauline, you've been working to set up cyclone triggers in many countries. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about the process of setting up these triggers to address multi-hazards and any differences that you might have seen between different countries.
Thank you so much, Liz. I mean, we've had, based on the conversation with Abdul and Liz, cyclones tend to be inherently multi-hazard events. You have wind speed impact, you have impacts based on rainfall, as you saw in one of the slides for Cyclone Idai, and you also have storm surge. So designing all this depends on finding almost like a balance between keeping the trigger scientifically sound, but also looking at whether this would be operationally practical. And again, you're seeing this is one of the challenges with cyclone anticipatory action. It's more, we're dealing with very short lead times. Usually, I mean, I know we're saying 72 hours for some countries just before landfall. It tends to be about typically a week or less. So, and sometimes even less in the case where a storm initially was not forecasted to be as intense and then rapidly intensifies. So the main sort of process we go through is trying to understand historically which hazards would be most impactful in a certain context. So you look at, I mean, for various cyclones, are you looking at the wind speed? Are you looking at historically the amount of rainfall? Are you also looking at, let's say, the coastline, whether there's a storm surge and the like? But you also want to look at essentially what you can track before landfall, or maybe just around landfall as well, as we are now learning when we're developing these self-funded frameworks. It's more, sometimes the data might not be available immediately, and I'll explain, might not be available as a forecast, and we're more looking at more observational data such as rainfall around landfall. So maybe the day before, the day of landfall. And also, I mean, just to mention some of the other countries, I mean, that have been mentioned. So Madagascar, one of the other things that we learned is that the government produces numbers on displaced persons about 48 hours after landfall. So it's produced quite quickly. So maybe that can fit right into the early response sort of component of part of the response cycle. And again, it's not just the wind speed, but also, you know, the flooding based on prolonged rainfall. But you also want to sort of limit how long after landfall you're looking at, because you could, I mean, we saw this with Cyclone Jude that, you know, went all the way into Malawi. You could be looking at days or even maybe a week after landfall. So just to try keep it more anticipatory action and more early response, we try to limit, I mean, how long after landfall we're looking at this. And again, as Abdul mentioned, in the Philippines, we have this model that we use for the SAF framework as well, that incorporates all these components. So we do have features in the model that look at wind speed and rainfall, and there are also, I believe, components on storm surge as well. But I mean, one of the major differences we've seen with countries is not only just the nature of the cyclone impacts in the different countries, we also try to look at, and this is a point Abdul also touched on, was the reliability of national forecasting systems, making sure that I mean, when you get a forecast, is it usable? Can you take a decision based on a forecast provided? But also one thing that's been coming up more often is also more on the preferences. And this is something you have to take into account too when you're developing a framework for a country. You can, I mean, there is a negotiation that happens, there's a discussion that happens on the inclusion of various hazards. So just keeping in mind that there are times, and we saw this with the last season in Madagascar that just ended, you'd have storms reaching the threshold, but it's almost like the government requests a stand down because, I mean, we had, you know, the rainfall in this area was needed because it's generally a drier area of the country. So we have to take all this into account, not only when developing the triggers, but also when deciding when to sort of what we call activate. This is releasing the funds based on the triggers being reached. Essentially, what you're trying to do in this process is to try get the triggers to be very understandable, but also very actionable and something that can be applied regardless of whether staff is backing the framework or can be applied at the national level. Thanks. I'll stop there. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pauline. And I think that reflects my experience as well, that really it helps to have a nice simple trigger, because then it's easy to know when it's been met, it's easy to monitor it, and it just makes life easier for everyone. But we know that tropical cyclones don't work in a simple way, and as you said, the nature of cyclone impacts can be different in different countries. So we do kind of need to think in a multi-hazard way about tropical cyclones. And I'll put my hand up and say that I think we could be doing that a lot better within the humanitarian sector. I mean, you've been mentioning your progress in terms of integrating rainfall forecasts, and that's fantastic. I think we can see that there's sort of separate sources of information that come through. So we had the flood webinar last week, and we talked about models like the Global Flood Awareness System, and that is still running for tropical cyclones. So you can still see what flooding might happen from a tropical cyclone. That often builds on top of those rainfall triggers, because we know that the antecedent conditions are important. So if it's wet already and we get a tropical cyclone that's going to move through very slowly and drop a lot of rainfall, then it's going to create flooding. If it's dry at that point in time, then, as you said, the rain could be very welcome in certain parts of the world. So we need to really understand when it's going to lead to negative impacts. And I think the challenges we've discussed between myself and WFP are about how do we do that prioritization? If we know that a cyclone, if GLOFASS is telling us that a cyclone is going to generate flooding, and the wind speed forecast tell us it's going to have some pretty severe wind speeds, how do we decide which communities to prioritize? Are we prioritizing the communities that live in the floodplain or the communities that live in the coast where the storm makes landfall and the winds will be most severe? And I think that's something that we need to obviously collaborate and work together on to try and improve that and support the decision making. So it's really, really great to hear your progress in that direction as well. And I know that we can talk a little bit more to WFP now. So Lena has joined the call today, and we talked a lot about triggers. And I know that in Mozambique I know that there's a sort of trigger harmonization. And I wonder whether you could tell us who has been involved in that trigger harmonization and what kind of complexities there were in that process.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Excellent, excellent. Let me just very quickly share my screen. Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, I think this is a very, very important question, especially when it comes to cyclone, no? Because there's so many different actors involved. We are all observing the different forecasts. And yeah, it's really important to be aligned among the different actors. When do we have an activation and what is going to happen? And who is going to do what, right? Because I think the worst thing that can happen, much worse, I think, than a potential false alarm or a miss or something like that, is that we have different partners giving different information, especially at local level, no? Because one of the things we really want to do is also to create awareness in the communities that are most exposed, when to take decisions based on forecasts, where this information comes from, create a certain level of trust, etc. So if we have one agency saying evacuate because our trigger was hit, and then the next agency says no, our trigger was not yet hit, so don't evacuate. In the end, I think that is kind of the worst case scenario, no? So that is why this is a theoretical example. I'm not saying that this has happened. So basically, in Mozambique, there's a very strong government-led technical working group for anticipatory action and early warning that started specifically for drought, but then basically 2 years ago has also expanded to also cover floods and cyclones. And basically what this technical working group does is that, of course, it brings together all the different actors, both government and non-government. So UN agencies are there, NGOs are there, all the different government institutions are there. And then there are different subgroups, and there's a specific subgroup that is dedicated to the trigger development, so that it's very clear what the trigger is, and also what the roles and responsibilities are of different actors. There is a government SOP that was actually approved last year, 1 week before Chido actually activated that same framework, which is a bit like you can imagine it like a very specific anticipatory action plan that is not just for one agency or one actor, but really that includes the roles and responsibilities, but also triggers, thresholds, etc., for all the actors. And then basically what we do as WFP or other actors as well is that we support a different part or different actions of this framework. So here I want to show you just briefly the forecasting system that is used by the National Met Office for cyclone forecasting, specifically for anticipatory action. So it uses the La Réunion forecasts, so Météo France. And here in a bit darker gray, you can see the districts that are currently covered with anticipatory action plans. So it's not yet the whole coastline that is covered. We had to prioritize certain districts, also given the very heavy investment in preparedness that is necessary, no? So maybe to show you briefly how it looks like, and this information is it's produced, I mean, this is updates automatically, and then whenever there is a trigger hit, it's sent automatically to the Met Office that then officially confirms the activation. So we talked a lot about SHIDO today. So here, for example, you can see the initial SHIDO forecasts, and then every 6 hours, as per the Météo France forecasts, we get this update. And yeah, basically here for SHIDO, we had the scenario that it moved north a lot, right? So you can see that it moved quite far away from the districts that actually have anticipatory action plan, despite an initial activation. So also, yeah, quite difficult to manage from a practitioner point of view. Then we had the second activation only a few weeks later, which was the Keledi, which I think we also briefly saw in a different format. So here, just to show you that it was really like almost playing with us, no? Because you can see the gray districts here that are part of the AA framework, and it basically moved closer and closer. And for a long time, it wasn't sure whether it would make landfall or not. But in the end, it did make landfall, and it did activate anticipatory action, but only, yeah, basically the lead times here were cut to only basically to less than a day. So what we were able to do was still to activate activate the government framework, but certain actions, of course, were not. It was not feasible to implement them. Yeah, but basically, just to show these examples, I think this platform is accessible to all the actors. But whenever there is an activation in here, you can see also very clearly the districts. What is the threshold? How does it work? Which district is at which level, readiness stage, activation phase, etc. That all the actors have, I think has been very clear in having really a coordinated response, a coordinated activation. And in case, for example, for SHIDO, when it moved north a lot, or the Keledi, where it wasn't supposed to make landfall for a long time, also have a joint decision led by the government, but among the humanitarian community, what to do in that case. No, should we redirect some of the released forecast-based finance for a very early response, etc., etc. No, so I think this also having this harmonization of triggers and of the approach overall really helped to yeah, I think cause a lot of less confusion, especially in those two districts that actually activated 3 times during one season, no? Because we had these scenarios where the 3 cyclones that hit Mozambique in the last season actually made landfall in quite similar area. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thanks.
That's super interesting. Thanks, Lena. And I remember this storm also being a headache for the Madagascar Red Cross as well, because it made that landfall in the north of the country, but there was always that chance that it would curve round and hit Toliara in the southwest. And in this case, the storm didn't do that, but you have to start thinking, okay, we're taking action in the north, but there's a possibility it could make landfall in a part of the country which is very vulnerable to tropical cyclones. And so then the decision making gets really complex for it. But yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. And I think you've talked us through that example from this storm where you didn't have the forecast until relatively late that it was going to make landfall in Mozambique. And I know with Chido as well, it happened very early in the season, so right at the start of when the cyclone season would usually occur. And I wonder, Lena, whether did that kind of cause any challenges as well, that it was sort of quite early in the year? Were people really ramped up and ready to activate anticipatory action, or was it a bit of a surprise?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because the framework for anticipatory action for cyclones from the government, and therefore, for example, ours as well as WFP, was only approved less than a week before before SHIDO actually activated that same framework. No, so yes, in general, there had been quite a lot of investments in preparedness actions. So the government is also very very aware of these risks. So there was also a national contingency plan that had already been approved. So there was a certain level of preparedness that already existed. But of course, yes, it was very fast. But I would actually say that I think the anticipatory action really sped up the whole process, not just the process for anticipatory action as such, but also for the early response, because a lot of actions were taken, like the formal activation, etc., before also the Christmas period when a lot of people then were out, etc., etc. I would say, yeah, definitely made a big difference in terms of speed. But yeah, it did take us quite by surprise for sure.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's not just in the Southwest Indian Ocean. I know Hurricane Beryl in 2024 caught people by surprise as well, that they weren't expecting a storm to reach hurricane strength so early in the season. And that's perhaps something to think about as well, that with climate change and warmer oceans, we can start to get things outside the parameters of what we might usually expect from tropical cyclones. So we should stress test our plans, I guess, to make sure that we are prepared for those scenarios as well. We've come to the end of our hour where we've got a sort of structure to the session, and I know that there's a few questions in the chat. And so I think we'll go to those. Originally, I was going to put Bella under pressure to talk more about the stress testing, but I feel like Bella's had to work so hard with this horrible forecast that I was putting at her. So perhaps we'll move on to the questions. And feel free we're going to stop recording now as we answer those questions. So feel free to turn on your video and keep